I want to welcome everyone. I am Nick Vonortas. Uh, I guess the only reason I'm starting this event is my colleagues allowed me to start is because I have many homes and I know a few people. Um, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I am at the George Washington University Department of Economics, but also director of the Institute for International Science and Technology Policy, which is an institute that with the incoming US administration might have a bigger role to play. But I also want to say that I have São Paulo Excellence Chair at the University of Campinas in Brazil, where I am now actually at this moment. And I want to mention that that operation is funded by FAPESP, which is the research foundation of the state of São Paulo, which has played a big role in these events and in this in the publication that is underlying these events that I will mention right now. Finally, I have yet a third appointment at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, where for several years now at the institute called ISEC. And thus I sort of connect several people here. What we are gathered today actually to listen to three excellent chapters, the summary presentations of three excellent chapters of publication, a forthcoming publication by Oxford University Press. It is now being prepared. This is the second workshop in this series. The book itself is on the challenges of technology upgrading and catching up of emerging economies. In the first workshop, which is available on YouTube and you can follow it, exactly a month ago, we were at the national level, so we discussed, we had 5 different presentations from very good people, like here my colleague Slavo Radoshevich and Professor Fangerberg and several others. But today we want to go one level below, and actually we will be discussing sectors, so challenges in technology upgrading and catching up at the sectoral level, and the discussion certainly will go at the company level. So we have 3 presentations. Let me just introduce them very quickly. The first one will be presented by André Cherubini Alves, who is a professor of innovation at FGV, what in Brazil is called FGV, is the Getulio Vargas Foundation. He is in the São Paulo at the School of Business Administration there. This paper is co-authored by myself. I was lucky actually to engage in this research myself, and also Professor Paulo Zawislak, who is an old friend, a good collaborator. He's heading the Institute on Research and Innovation called NITEC at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. The second presentation, now I'm sorry, André is going to present an example actually that of a major effort of this kind that took place in Brazil, and in fact it continues today, involving the shipbuilding industry as an extension of an extraction industry, the oil and gas sector. The second example today is yet again from the same country, the emerging country of Brazil, And this is a different sector, a different industry, the mining sector, and this is by Professor Paulo Figueiredo. He is a professor of technology and innovation management at the same school, FGV, but now in Rio de Janeiro campus. He is at the School of Public and Business Administration, and the chapter is co-authored by Professor Janaína Piana, professor at the Department of Business. Janaína is at the Federal University of Technology in Paraná, in Brazil. And finally, a third presentation will be by Professor Jae-Yong Chung. He is at the College of Business, the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, which for the rest of us who are foreigners know it better as KAIST. It's a very well-known school in Korea. And also with Professor Hieran Huang. He's at the Department of Industrial Organization at the Daejeon Development Institute. Now we will hear these three things. This third presentation is on all these other kinds of developments that need to happen, the systemic developments in order to support this technology upgrading. And I'm sure Professor Chung is going to explain very well, and he is going to use Professor Chung and Huang. They are going to use the example of Korea. This is a country, of course, that many emerging economies can learn from, because it is, although it is fully developed today, it just recently reached that stage. So there is still understanding and a lot of adjustment of what it means to have closed the gap, let's say, right? So for this purpose, because we have this very interesting discussion ahead of us, we invited actually Dr. Anwar Aridi. He is a senior private sector specialist for Europe right now in Central Asia at the World Bank. He is based currently in Sofia, Bulgaria. I think today he's talking to us from Washington, D.C., from headquarters. So Anwar has had a brilliant career until now at this international organization, and I thought he would make very good comments on the basis of what we will hear from the authors, but then also from his own experiences, and he will set off the discussion. So I wanted to say, in terms of timing, we have asked the presenters to keep it to a maximum of 15 minutes each, and then we will have the comments of 10 minutes or so by Anwar. And the rest of the time will be open for discussion. Questions from the audience, from us. It will be a free, open for all discussion. So that everybody knows, we will finish this event a few minutes before the hour. So we will finish approximately 15 or 10 minutes to the hour. Because of some technical issues in the background. So, without further ado, I want to invite André Alves to start us off with the first presentation here on the shipbuilding industry of Brazil. André.
All right. Good morning from Brazil. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Nick, for organizing this event. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges and things that happen here in Brazil regarding shipbuilding and policy making to actually create opportunities to catch up, and some of the lessons that we can take from this. giving you know, some issues that happen. So the presentation is about macro and micro foundations for technological upgrading and innovation. The picture that you see there is from one of the sites in Brazil that were put together when this whole process started. It's one of the biggest shipbuilding sites in Brazil. Probably compared to Asian sites, some people may say it's not that big, but for Latin America, it's quite huge. So, so a little bit of the context here. The whole idea of this research was to understand, you know, how emerging markets develop. This is an old question in the literature. Usually we talk about the need for catching up through technological capabilities and upgrading. That's how economic development takes place and growth. And we have had in the past some countries that did very well in this process. But the majority of countries from middle income um, levels, they actually struggle to achieve those growth rates and actually get trapped in the what we call middle income trap, right? So how can we overcome these challenges? And some recent literature is talking about mission-oriented policies as a way to direct change, direct innovation, and actually create the right incentives. So this case that I'm going to present kind of resembles a bit what mission-oriented policies look like. And from what we'll see here, some challenges arises when we try to set some policies that may be disconnected to uh, some of the basic levels of capabilities present. Okay, so just to show, this is just a timeline for you to see during since 2000, several laws and regulations were put in place in the oil and gas industry in Brazil. But I want to highlight in 2005 here, there's this para T um, thing down here, which is essentially when Brazil found the first pre-salt oil field, which was a major oil field in Brazil, and that started a series of other discoveries. And all of a sudden, the country and Petrobras you know, found themselves into this major challenge of how to explore, right, this field. So for you to have just an idea, this is what the Petrobras developments have been over the years. They have been able to actually go deeper and deeper in the technology to explore oil. This is just an idea down here. The you know the size of the area that these oil fields were found. And at the time, around 2005, between 2005 and 2007, there was this expectation of massive investments in the sector, around $180 billion to actually, you know, build infrastructure, build ships, build platforms, and so on and so forth. So this was the context. It was prior to 2008, so prior to the big crisis. So we were having a major commodity boom in Brazil and in the world. The economy was growing quite fast. So there was this movement happening. So then we put together a framework to analyze this case, because it's essentially what was put in place, which is an institutional market governance setup Then we have industry coordination, a more MESO level of analysis, where you have several players in the industry trying to coordinate themselves to actually raise a whole sector. And then we have the micro level, which is where we actually see the capabilities being built and where most of the challenges arise. So just for you to have an idea, so the institutional setup that I'm talking about here correspond to local content policies, financial incentives, several fiscal benefits, special interest rates, and so on, and including a national program to mobilize the whole industry to actually engage in this sector. Down here, you see the market governance to promote the industry, which involved essentially Petrobras, Sete Brasil, which is a company that was created to deal with drill ships, and other operators, which are companies also from the oil industry, like Shell and others that could actually also explore oil in Brazil. Then you have the suppliers down here providing special equipment and so on. And in the middle, you have the shipyards. All right, so these shipyards, and I highlight virtual here because some of them existed before the incentives, and some of them were actually planned to be constructed in order to supply this major demand from Petrobras for several types of ships. I talked about 2008 because essentially there was a huge demand for orders in international shipyards, and what happened there was that there was a lot of the timeline that Petrobras was working on could not afford this line of waiting for to actually start operating in this field. So they, when analyzing the cost benefit of buying from overseas instead of building in Brazil, they decided to go for building. And then what happened after 2008 is that, you know, we had a major crisis. Then the demand for ships also released a little bit of the orders from this international shipyard. So the context changed during this process. But essentially, the requirements for the shipyards to be built, they would need a company that would have competence to deal with complex projects, and they would require also technological partners, because major companies in Brazil did not have the necessary knowledge around shipbuilding, right? So they had to combine that in order to do tech transfer and start building some capabilities. In the next slide here, you see the coastline of Brazil and where the major shipyards were being placed. And the red ones are the ones that were actually operating by the time of the research. The other ones were being built, right? You see the technological partners on the right here. The only two of them that were not Brazilian owned were Jurong, Aracruz, and Brasfels. They're both companies from Singapore that were operating in Brazil, and the other ones were owned by national companies that had technological partnerships with international companies. Okay, so these shipyards were being built. We can perhaps highlight some of the companies that were the international companies that were involved. Yes, Vonortas.
5 more minutes.
Sure.
You may want to move to your conclusions.
Okay. Um, so so this is the structure of contracts that Petrobras were dealing with. They have a couple of different modules depending on the complexity of projects. An interesting thing to highlight here was that they were experiencing some delays whenever projects were from Petrobras, when Petrobras was the lead company in the projects, whereas the ones that were chartered could move very fast. They didn't know why. They thought it was related to the complexity of the projects. And so what we did in this research, we went on one of the main shipyards in Brazil, the one in the picture, where they were actually building the hulls, this bottom part of the shipyard. And we actually went in each technological interface of the construction project, from engineering on here to constructing. So the way you can think about is a kind of ships they are built kind of in a legal like manner. You have the engineering, then you start building the blocks, and then you add paint, you add pipes, you add machinery, and so on. We visited each of these interfaces to see the levels of capabilities and how the projects were evolving. Okay, we did a very detailed analysis, and here are some of the summaries of what happened. So on the engineering side, we could observe that there was a high complexity and lacking design capabilities or engineering capabilities to deal with complex projects, which were sometimes leading to some errors that would end up in production. Procurement, which accounted for 40% of the budget of the whole project, had a very difficult time in finding local suppliers that could actually reach the price needed, a competitive price. And on the construction side is where we saw the most issues happening related to projects that they call it leaving projects, right? Because projects, they would essentially have errors, they would change, they would not have enough stability to actually build up some learning. They in the middle of the way, they have many decisions of contracting out and internalizing segments of production, which created even more instability. And essentially, we saw that there was a inability to learn, right? Sometimes they would even say that it was negative learning curves. So this is the outcome of the industry. Over here on the left, you see the shipbuilding industry on the 60s. It actually had a very much a very intense shipbuilding industry in Brazil that grew even faster, was able to grow even faster than what we see today. The shipbuilding, after relied a lot on subsidies also back in the day. They essentially lost competitiveness, and they started again in the 2005 and on. So we had a high demand over here, but as you can see, the productivity did not grow as fast. And in the middle of the way, we even had corruption scandals taking place called the car wash operations, which found many bribes between political parties and contracting firms, and suddenly the industry just kind of started to collapse. So some failures, right? So these macro incentives, they are they worked in the short term. They actually created the right incentives for the industry. They reduced some initial transaction costs and made possible for some companies to get in, but open up this room for corruption between public and private sector. On the MESO level, regarding the industry level, we thought was maybe too big, too broad, and too fast. They try to get as much ships out as possible, and lacking some focus on where the country could actually be competitive. And in the micro level, we have these issues of technological and organizational capabilities that was not stable enough. So to finalize, institutional incentives are important, but it's at the micro level where you actually see success. So we have to really think about how learning takes place in the firm level in order to catch up. And there are high capability building costs that may appear if you don't think about those things. And is there an upside? I'm not sure. A few of these shipyards are still functioning, but we also have some infrastructure for shipbuilding that was built. It's there. Maybe there might be a way to put it back up some way. But we have to see how. Okay, Nick. So
Okay.
this is it. I hope I made it on time.
Thank you, André. Thank you very much. For me, this is a very successful discussion, because one typically finds the positive cases and people do not want to refer to negative cases, but we learn equally much from those that have not succeeded 100%, which is actually the vast majority of the time. So I want to turn immediately to Paulo. Paulo, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick, for this kind introduction. Hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure to participate in this workshop to discuss this book chapter, which is authored also by Janaína Piana, who is here.
Hello.
Hi, Janaína, sharing the presentation with me. We are very glad to participate in this fascinating editorial project and this timely and relevant book. So we thank you again, the editors, for this opportunity. So our chapter, it focuses on technological learning strategy and technology operating in terms of accumulation of technological capabilities. The chapter is focused on the mining industry. And as we know, the mining industry is a typically natural resource intensive industry. And our interest in this type of industry began as early as the early 2000s, when we began investigating technological learning processes in the forestry industry. Then we moved into the sugarcane ethanol industries and the agricultural seeds industry, in which Brazil holds leadership in all those industries. And we began to get interested by the intricacies of the natural resource intensive industries because of their nature. You cannot simply apply existing frameworks and proxies to tackle this type of industries because of its intrinsic characteristics. For instance, the localization of knowledge and the idiosyncrasies those industries have, which somehow forces countries and companies to develop their own technological paths. And the mining industry was an intriguing one for us, because this type of industry is normally labeled as low-tech a high polluter, commodity-based. But we were not comfortable with this type of approach. And also we realized that this type of industry had been and it still has been forgotten in the literature, in the strategic management literature, but also in the catch-up literature. So that's why we began to focus on this industry. By 2014, we began an early attempt into the mining industry. Then we engaged in an initial project. Then Janaína came to FGV to undertake her doctoral research, and she engaged in the mining industry. And then we started this project looking first at the ecosystem in a project funded by the IDB in Washington. And this somehow led us to know a little bit better the ecosystem of the mining industry, looking at small and highly innovative startups around the large companies, the big animals such as Vale and so forth. But we wanted to reach the big animal, the big companies, but it was very difficult to get in because they're quite closed. But with this project, Janaína and I began to approach Vale, Votorantim, and the big companies, and also for her to undertake her doctoral thesis, we began to approach the mining industry, and this industry is quite relevant for several reasons. As we know, through the mining industry, we can tackle the problems of climate change, because the mining industry is the big supplier of inputs for clean technologies. And also, the mining industry plays a very important role to tackle the population growth, because it is through the mining industry that the infrastructure to cope with population growth is going to be supplied. So we need to have a different reading of this strategic industry, not only for a resource-rich country like Brazil, but also for the world. So, and also those were the issues that motivated us to undertake this study. The second major motivation was the lack that we observe in the technological catch-up literature in dealing with and tackling micro-level issues. How the process of technological upgrading takes place inside industries and specifically inside companies, and how can we explain successful passes of technological catch-up in this type of industry, in a natural resource intensive, especially in mining. So we then had our framework, which was built in an inductive way. We first began our talks with managers, engineers, to understand better what they were doing, how they achieved their technological achievements in terms of innovation and so forth. And then we began to construct on the basis of our data collection process. So our data collection process was quite intensive, because we spend a lot of time in the field talking to the engineers, talking to managers to understand from them how this industry innovates. And Janaína, please.
I think it's important to mention that in the beginning, we started with Vale, because it represents 50% of Brazilian mining production. But during the interviews, some interviewers said about Votorantim Metais, that was another company to be studied. So we noted that Vale and Votorantim Metais both are Brazilian mining companies and not a multinational subsidiaries, what is very common in mining industry from emerging economies. So these two companies was very interesting to the investigation. So we use many collection techniques like observation, informal meetings, technical. So, but especially the formal interviews, né? These formal interviews, with this was possible to start interviews with the partners, like universities, suppliers that work together in project with mining companies, following a snowball process.
Yes, that was very interesting, the rich experience of snowballing. And as Janaína said, what attracted us in this industry is that in the case of Brazil, the mining industry is dominated by domestic firms, which is quite different from South Africa or Chile, for instance, or other mining region countries. So in the gathering of evidence and analyzing the evidence, we arrived at this type of path, which is quite aggregate, but it tells us about the major trajectory taken by this industry, the mining industry in Brazil, led by major firms such as Vale, which is the world leading company in ore production and also Votorantim, which is a leading company in nickel production. And as we have here, as a typical latecomer, they started here, simply using existing technologies, and they arrived here. But the path was not that linear, was full of curves. They could not simply import dominant technologies. They had to develop their own technologies to tackle their idiosyncratic problems, as it usually happens in natural resource industries. And another question was how to explain this successful path despite several hurdles and difficulties to tackle the technology. The mining industry is a very tacit one because no mineral deposit is similar to the other one. It's quite unique. So you need specific solutions in some cases, like the major project that Vale has in northern Brazil, the S11D project, which is the world's largest in this. They had to develop new to the world technologies to tackle with idiosyncratic problems. So the question was how to explain all these paths here. And our research pointed to a combination of doing or interaction, using or experimentation-based kind of learning on the one hand, but also on the other hand, R&D-based type of learning. So differently from what the literature says, that this type of industry has no link with universities and so forth or research institutes. Differently from this, we found very important links between Vale and several universities to develop different types of technologies. And even some of them dealing with radical innovations, like the use of bacteria to undertake exploration in order to avoid the use of water. This is disruptive technology, which Vale is already undertaking. And also other types of technology that Vale had to develop with suppliers to avoid the use of water in the mining process, in the exploration process. So those are the environmentally led type of concerns and innovations that Vale had to tackle to different types of learning processes, not only R&D based, but also experiment based type of learning, especially engineering based and design and engineering. So the message of our study, thanks, Nick. The message of our study is that a natural resource industry like this plays a very important role in the overall catch-up of a country like a resource-rich country like Brazil. And it may also work as a platform for industrial diversification in a country, which is very important also for economic catch-up. So I hope you enjoy our chapter, and I thank you again for your patience and attention, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for interrupting, but
No problem.
Sure we will come back into this in the discussion session with our audience. Okay, I want to go directly to Professor Chung from Korea. Professor Chung, are you muted, unmuted? We don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now, yes.
Yes, okay. Good morning, everyone, and good evening, or even afternoon, everyone. This is Jae Chung speaking from Korea. First of all, it's my great pleasure to present idea on non-technological capability with an evidence from the Korean firms. Well, I will talk within a 15 minutes span. 3 modules consist. First of all, let me introduce some of the stylized technological capability indicators, as well as some of the catch-up mechanism has been identified in the literature and new phenomena. And also, I will introduce the new dimension of upgrading, a special reference to non-technological capabilities. And so, second topic, with case studies concerned with facing the challenges in the development of a complex product system, or maybe even call it building the non-technological capabilities with reference to 3 different products. And thirdly, I will spend some time on conclusion discussions, but maybe there are some small succinct conclusion, but there are many unanswered questions, so on. So let me start with the first part. Well, as we all know that there are some cross-cutting questions, how latecomers develop their technological capabilities, but my attention is more to the non-technological capabilities. Or maybe this cross-cutting Oxford Handbook chapter, what are the key stylized challenges during the transition and upgrading, and maybe even the post-catching up period? So I'm also part of these questions, and also this presentation also would like to link with a previous workshop, that the domain of capability, that upgrading requires a social capital, and also, as Slava mentioned about the need to develop some indicators as well. And also, my focus is much more to the upgrading with a qualitative, in a sense, hope to develop some indicators for upgrading from the qualitative research. So this is the some evidence what we have been achieved through the technological capability building over the 30 years span. As we all know that one of the significant indicators from the technological capability is about patent activities. And we all see that there are fast catching up by the Taiwan and Korea in the 1990s to the so far, but also we can notice that China is picking up very rapidly, but that's the one new phenomena. But if you look at the more Korean patent activities, United States, even though we have achieved some significant ranking in year 2015, we are the third highest nation that ranking the patent activities, but large number of the patent contributions coming from the Samsung Group. And also their Samsung Group contribution about 54% of the total US patenting in the United States. And also another evidence looking at the science and technological capabilities are the using the indicator of the knowledge of production in Korea. Well, this is the statistics from, hang on a minute, sorry. This is the statistics from year 2000 to year 2007. And also other from the right-hand side, the graph is about the proportion of knowledge production in the worldwide comparison. So two clear characteristics can be mentioned. First of all, the patterns of the knowledge of production in Korea now shifting from engineering to the science. So that's a very the clear phenomena what we are observing right now. And also we all know that the proportion of knowledge of production has increased from 2 to 3% by 2016. So these are the two quantitative indicators with what we can see from patent technological capability in Korea. And also another key characteristics I would like to mention, it also has been identified in the literature. One of the dominant theory we call is about the product life cycle, and Professor Lin Soo Kim used these the product life cycle with the reverse methods. The many the product or process innovation that made by the Koreans, we start with the process innovation, the product innovations. And the cycle pattern was a reverse. That's the one has been quite commonly accepted in the literature. And some of the products which we can mention in the very fast catching up products, or maybe even maintaining the leadership, there was some predictable cycle was much more fitted in the Koreans catching up. These are the example of flash memory or DRAM or LCD, so forth. And third key characteristics, which I mentioned, knowledge of production is shifting from engineering to the science. And another, which quite noticeable effort, which have been made in the very recently, now we are making industry specialization from engineering to the much more diversities, such as a complex product system, which I will mention in the empirical studies, such as nuclear reactor industries, and also other very complex product industries, so on. And very recently, now we are entering the biopharma industry as well. So these are the new diversification phenomena in the case of Korean catching up or even upgrading. And also another emphasis I would like to make, and also this paper would like to emphasize about now we are putting much more putting importance of not only technological capability, but also the non-technological capability. So that's why I'm following the recent inquiry related to the capability building. So when we talk about non-technological capabilities, there has been a very much scattered in the literature. They talks about the non-technological capabilities. And also we can, in the literature, some call it administrative innovations, organizational so forth. You can take a reference to the right-hand side of the literature review. But in this case, I will follow the very similarly, which has been Professor Martin Bell, and also the second presenter for today, Paulo, Professor Paulo Figueiredo mentioned about the importance of the non-technological capabilities. And these are some the understanding of non-technological capabilities. inclusion of the marketing or the administrative and logistics and financial activities in association with accumulation of technological capabilities for production and innovation activities. So I will follow the similar, the concept of the non-technological capabilities. So these are the research framework which I would like to emphasize. Well, I'm going to use the framework of reverse product life cycle, which is the the stages, fluid and transitional specific, we all know. And also I will use 3 case studies: small nuclear reactor development, and large nuclear reactor constructions, and third, building a high-speed train construction in Korea. And with these 3 case studies, well, I found that not only the technological capability building is required, some other capabilities seems to me hinders or offset for upgrading. So one of the problems, why the project suffered such an enormous delay, and also how non-technological capability contributes to project completions. So following this, the questions, I will go through some of the case studies. So first of all, this is much more mature case of coming from. This is developing our construction of the high-speed train in Korea. And also we had, how to call it, the Korean government made their own decision that we should build high-speed train. But at that time, we didn't have any technological independence. So at the beginning, we start to the technology transfer from the France. And also the way we organized building the construction was they separate, making the construction separately, railroad and track, the separations. And at the same time, there was a new organization set up. Those are the new approach for building the high-speed train. But in the process of construction of the high-speed train, we had a series of challenges has been confronted with. This is the category of organizational innovation. Well, at that time, we couldn't understood properly how to build the complex product constructions. So we had to experience a series of design alteration and incurring the cost. And also, there is some constructions philosophy. They couldn't differentiate between general rail construction versus high-speed the constructions. And that when you're building the high-speed, the rail, you have to go through integration of millions and thousands of components. But we couldn't, at the beginning, we didn't follow such a technology regime, so we had to go through some difficulties. And also, even though we had a new organizational setup, but we had to go through the different train system management, such as operators versus network constructions. So inevitably, later faced with operational inefficiencies. These are the some cases where we had a mature stage of the building and also the technological and non-technological capabilities. Now I have 5 minutes, Nick, yeah? The second is about the larger nuclear reactor export. This one is was developed by the Korean independent indigenous, the 1,400 megawatts the capacity of nuclear reactor. And in year 2009, Korean were able to export the product towards Arab Emirate. But even though we had our the operational efficiency, when we're exporting the nuclear power plant, we had to go through some serious problems, which are under the challenges of organizational and financial innovations. Well, first of all, the financial innovations, we had a difficulty with the project financing. And with the difficulty finding the right equity partners, that was the first we had to confront with. Second, financial institution, there has been some lagging or maybe even insufficient response of such a project financing. So lagging the financial institutions, and also finally the financing the management. That is another issues related to organizational and financial innovation in the large nuclear export, the nuclear construction in UAE. And third, finally, is about the fluid stage of the nuclear development. This is the world first design and approved, made a standard design approval by the nuclear authority in Korea. Well, at the beginning, we had a very good idea of the innovative design. And also, even though this was the world first, the developers and regulators come to a certain point. They should go through the joint study between developer and regulators at the before the pre-application safety review. And also they considered, well, we should amend the Nuclear Act because it was an innovative design. But however, since it was the world first and the new innovative design, we had a problem with a co-evolution between regulator and developers. So developers' point of view, a new regulatory development was required. And also the organizational recognition of appropriate guidelines and preparations. But in fact, they couldn't receive such guidelines. They have to drop the approval process. And also from the regulator's point of view, there has been continuously the exercise, the past routine function brought the difficulties in creating a new regulatory guidelines. So when we are in the fluid stage, these are the Korean had experience with developing the world first innovative products and with a relation to the regulatory innovations. So even though I'm running very quickly, but these are the three some identified challenges and with experience related from the product development, from the specific to the fluid and product life cycle. So in a specific phase, organizational capabilities, that was a very critical. And transition phase, the project financing capabilities. In the fluid phase, very importance of regulatory innovation. These are the key findings through the case studies of the three products. Well, in the main article, I elaborate more closely and in detail. And if you're interested, I'm more than happy to receive your comments. Well, these are the final conclusion of the three case studies with prospective non-technological capabilities. Well, first of all, project financing is efficient entry mode for the large investment, high risk environment. So these are some findings we have identified. And also, regulatory innovation is very critical for the upgrading. And third, we also find some identified problems with the persistence of catch-up routine with a technology and organizational perspective. And with my final chapter, final slide, even though there are many questions and more, we can have more discussions as well, how to build the non-technological capabilities and what are the critical elements? Well, still, I didn't get the right answer, but still, this is my mind-boggling issue. Well, we all know that the transition is neither an automatic or noisy. That's a very acceptable terms. And also, when we look at the product comparison between mass-produced goods and complex product goods, well, we are very much fitted into, we call it affinity, the catch-up affinity. But however, we are having difficulties in the catching up or upgrading of complex product goods. That's some of the debatable topic. And also, what about when we case terms of China? The China is a maybe different nation, different perspectives required. China is no longer catching up, but maybe they are showing a rather superior capabilities in terms of technological and non-technological aspects of it. So when we compare with China, well, with a latecomer, this different viewpoint is required. And also, in terms of complex product transitions, middle-income countries really matter. It's the important thing. And what are the process of specialization will be only an important issue. So maybe these are some open question to all of you. And let me stop with my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Very, very good. Thank you. Excellent. Very good. Very clear presentation. And I think all three presentations fit together quite nicely. Let me then invite Anwar Aredi from the World Bank to tell us, give us his opinion. Anwar?
Thank you, Nick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, first, thanks for the invite. I feel back in school in the PhD program. I've learned a lot. I don't know much about Korea and Brazil, except from reading the literature and trying to leverage what we can learn for the countries that we work on, mainly in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, where these economies are specifically challenged by this big question that you're dealing with, which is the middle income trap, the middle innovation trap. So what I'm gonna try to do is to talk about three things. First is the most easiest of the questions, why is this important? Second, what did I learn from these different experiences that you shared? And finally is the how, or the policy challenge. What does this mean in practice for us in the development world, if you want. So the first question, as I mentioned, is the key challenge of tech upgrading, which is highly relevant for economic catch-up of developing economies, especially those who have already achieved efficiency gains from tech adoption. And here we're talking about all the economies that we deal with, such as Poland, such as the Czech Republic, Slovakia, more recently as well, Romania and Bulgaria, all these economies that have in the last 20 years accumulated a lot of the technologies in their industries and achieved a lot of the firm productivity due to this within component, if you want, and then reaching that level where they need to break through the success that Korea have done, and all the cases that we've seen, a lot to be learned here. So this is extremely important, dealing with narrowing the productivity and the income gap with leading economies. It's about basically getting the complementarities right, and this finding, or this correlates as well with one of our key publications on the innovation paradox, which highlights these different complementarities. And you went through many of them, but it's basically about getting this capabilities escalators at the different developmental level from the inception to the maturity level. So it's about the complementarities and what complementarities are those. The second key reason in the why is this is way more important now than before, as the world is in the midst of this global race for leadership in digital technologies as they relate to general purpose technologies. So it's not idiocentric for a sector or a specific technology. We're at this either in the midst or more than midst of this digital race, which is about the ubiquitous adoption and dissemination of digital technologies within the economy as a big window of opportunity. Nevertheless, we do know that diffusion of these digital technologies is not straightforward. It's a capability question on the firm level, on the sector level, and the economy level. So this is also another reason why this is an important question of tech upgrading, is the digital or the general purpose technology in our era. The third key question is, given the current crisis that we're going through, the COVID crisis and its implication, it is clear that the role of state have proved to be instrumental in responding, managing, And if I want to be optimistic in overcoming the crisis, if we see the light of the tunnel, the key lesson is that countries that did have strong institutions, so whoever has been skeptic about the role of state in managing or devising and implementing policies, maybe the time now is to reconsider. So these are the key main reasons why this topic is very important to us. So what did I learn from these papers, which again, I thank you for the presenters. They're super interesting. They look at the micro, meso, macro level, and from countries like Korea and Brazil, talking about mega infrastructure projects and major investments. So the two things we learn, again, it's tech upgrading is not monolithic. It's firm specific, it's sector specific, and the key takeaway is none of these things happened on their own. There has been, whether they're successes or failures, these have been mission-oriented policies. There has been an active involvement of these public and private institutions. So that makes us ask the question is whether the lack of the role of the state could also hinder the process of learning for the emergence of such successful or failure stories. I bring this up because we've done recently a nice piece of work actually with Slavo in Ukraine, where we look at the ICT sector in Ukraine, and we also adopt that framework of the windows of opportunity, where we see that this sector have achieved a lot of growth, leveraging many of the windows of opportunity internally in the market from the regulatory perspective, but as well as from the demand for digital services globally and in Europe and the financial crisis. Nevertheless, there was a complete disappearance of the role of the state. And we try to ask that question, if the role of the state in addressing some of the key issues that require that last jump of upgrading of capabilities is the key factor. So a lot to be learned here on the role of the state. The second key point that I learned in the what, if you want, is about learning. How does learning happen? What are the frictions that hinder learning, and the cost of learning, also the sources of learning? So until recently, if you want, the research has been dominated by the framework of learning in manufacturing, the typical pathway of catch-up for emerging economies, from OEMs to ODMs, and then original brand manufacturing. Does this framework that we have learned from the manufacturing storyline apply now to the digital space? What are the implications for this catch-up for the digital race? Do we need to look at this in a different way? And this is also very important to me, as the economies that I deal with have been the major source of outsourcing of digital services, whether it's Bulgaria, Romania, and Ukraine, where you have a big digital talent, and they have been the powerhouse of outsourcing services. How do we upgrade from just being a powerhouse of outsourcing to being producers of products and services in the digital space? We know the stories of Ireland, we know the story of Israel and India, but what kind of framework should we apply to understand this? And in this context as well, we've done a lot of work recently on Europe. We've done a flagship called Europe 4.0 and the digital, addressing the digital dilemma, where we look at digital technologies and try to dissect them based on their efficiency implications and efficiency gains. So we claim that digital technologies are not monolithic. We differentiate between operational technologies, where digital technologies replace labor, and transactional technologies, where digital technologies facilitate the matching between supply and demand, and informational technologies the AI and machine learning, which is driven by the reduction in cost of computing and storage. And these three different buckets of technologies, if you want, do have different implications on the economic activities and require different policies. Operational technologies accelerate the agglomeration aspect of technologies, so they have negative implications on conversions, if you want, while transactional technologies have more inclusive nature for smaller and market inclusion factors. So such kind of framework maybe could help us better understand the catch-up story when it comes to the digital space. I keep going back to the digital space. The third thing,
2 minutes, maybe.
Okay, 2 minutes. The third little thing, which I'm sure you've already discussed in the first workshop, is the problem of measurement. If we look on the wrong indicators, we're going to tell a different story. When we tell a different story, we're going to make it different investments. So where do we look? And here it's also a challenging question because when we want to tell the story of technology catch-up, okay, yeah, we don't need to look only at R&D inputs and patenting. So where do we look? We're looking at ISO certification. We're looking at the World Management Survey. We're looking at connected net to do. But is that enough? We do need more data and more indicators and more indices to tell a story that is more inclusive for the story of tech catch-up. I'll jump quickly for the policy challenge. I welcome that this book is a major departure from the biased approach toward tech catch-up, especially the non-R&D engineering design aspect. This is very much welcome. Thus, the policy challenge is in promoting a diversity in learning challenge, going back to learning, through which firms can upgrade their capabilities. It's a reconciliation between knowledge inputs and learning modes, whether it's science, technology, and innovation, and learning by doing. So it's basically about the complementarity of learning modes. But what does this mean in terms of innovation policy space? What kind of policy instruments are more conducive for such kind of learning? The inter-learning between firms, sectors, cross-pollination, consortiums. Here it's a blind spot for me, which it would be nice to talk about this. The second key policy challenge, again, it's back to the role of the state and the organizations, the public organization. The key challenge that you talk about early on the learning at the firm level, which is you need to move to the design state, you have to go through the implementation process. In the policy space, it's probably the other way around. It's much easier to get the design space, and let's put an industrial policy, let's design it, let's do all the analytics. But when it comes to implementation, we don't always get the results. The evidence from Brazil is very clear. So how do we get the implementation right? Why did it work in Korea and it didn't work in Brazil? What is the main difference? Is it only the car wash? So the implementation and the capabilities of the state and its institutions on the sectoral level and innovation system level is very key. And that takes me to the last point, which is of course related to it. It's the industrial policy, and in the context of the two major objectives of our time, which is greening and digitizing economies. These are not going to happen on their own. There is a role for the state in concept, the design of it. Maybe we can get it right. How do we get it in the implementation is the key challenge. What are the key policy instruments? What are the capabilities for these public organizations to implement, monitor, correct, take stock, and learn on the public administration side to produce results? Korea have done it, is still doing it. What can we learn from it? What can Brazil teach us? And what are the lessons for the economies that we deal with in Europe, in Poland, in Romania, and Bulgaria, where the capabilities of public institutions are a key challenge and not the financing, not the resources. We see major amounts of funding coming from the European Commission, and the implementation and disbursement of these amounts of money is a key challenge. I went over time. I will stop here. Thanks again.
Excellent, excellent comments, Anwar. That's exactly the point. I think I like all these three presentations exactly for what is coming out. We are not focusing on the traditional catch-up story here, which is the technology and the transfer of that typical knowledge. We are talking about implementation in all three cases. All three cases actually go into this, and this is very good because this is now a major topic in the literature. For example, with the Yannis Kalogiru, we are in a project, major project, the European Union, about intangible assets for productivity. How can we measure the effect of intangible assets like these that we are discussing here in productivity? So I want to say that there is another group in YouTube following this discussion, and they are already asking questions. So I have some questions for the presenters, but before we go into the questions from the audience, I wanted to ask any of the presenters want to respond to Anwar? Do you have anything to respond to those comments? If André, you raise your hand.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the key questions was for my side here for presentation was how to get implementation right. You set the policies. How do you get implementation right? And in the case of shipbuilding, and maybe perhaps I can connect to some of the questions that Bruno asked here and Marianne, you have to be selective, right, on what you're going to develop. In our case, was very broad, very spatially distributed all across the coastline. If you look at benchmarkings across the world on shipbuilding, you see that they're very clustered, very close together, so they benefit from these proximities, right? And in our case, was kind of more, disputed by states to actually get a piece of that major infrastructure investments. And also this question that even Bruno put here related to long-term versus short-term. The whole narrative was a lot focused on the long-term benefits of growth through technology, but when on the implementation side, on the short term, perhaps we actually did not address as well this capability escalators that we see in the innovation paradox related to organizational capabilities. That's what we even highlighted: organizational, technological, and organizational capabilities to, in order for you to actually, do these first steps. So a lot of people in the sector were talking about technologies, and the people that were actually on the shipyards, they're thinking, I have to deliver this by this deadline, and we're not able to. So we have to actually learn how to produce things before thinking about, amazing technologies for the future. So there was this disconnect.
Thank you. Thanks, André. Professor Chung.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the comments. And some of the comments you have mentioned, that it's quite agree that the complementarity, right? I totally agree with you. And also, whenever we confront with building the capabilities, different stages, different product, different industry may require different complementarity. I totally agree with you. Now, you mentioned rather positively of the Korean cases, but I'm really more to the confession that we are not doing well. So, but however, I would like to raise some of the Korean perspective. Well, during the catch-up phase, a role of state and public institutions or institutes play a very significant role. The technology import, the building the indigenous capability, so on. But when we come to stage of upgrading, when we come to stage of developing frontier technologies, then whether the statement that the role of state and role of public institutions still valid in the transition or upgrading stage, that's in question. Because over the 40 years, top-down planning and by the role of state, and also technology diffusion or maybe building the indigenous capability by the role of the public institution has been widely embedded. So much more catch-up routine has been established. So therefore, when they're trying to migrate or change their position, then it comes to an issue of the past dependencies of the role of public institution and top-down planning. So that's for the Korean case.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment or, yes, Professor, go ahead. Paulo.
May I? Many thanks, Anwar, for your comments. I did enjoy your point on implementation. I believe that implementation is not separated from the process of innovation. They are interrelated, and the implementation itself is part of the innovation process. And during the implementation of an innovation project, for instance, as we know, the company will face several problems and hurdles, and especially in the case of natural resource intensive industries, there are so many idiosyncratic problems for which there is no dominant technology to solve and no codified knowledge available. So in this case, for instance, the companies we researched here, they had to turn to government institutions such as local research institutions, local universities, who somehow held the local science, the local knowledge related to geology and other characteristics. So in this case, we see an important role in the public institutions in supporting the technology upgrading process in the companies, and especially during the implementation process. So the message is that the learning, the management of learning during the implementation process may make all the difference for a successful catch-up like this.
Great, thank you. Now, let me pass to some of the questions that I have in front of me here. The first comes from Marianne Franzoso. By the way, Marianne is our newest addition to the program, our new postdoc researcher in Campinas. She is asking whether the goal dispersion of the program makes a difference. In other words, she addresses the question to André, Alves, but I think it's a more general question for the rest of you as well. In other words, in that particular case, which did not succeed very much, was one of the reasons that the state was trying to do too many things, not only develop an industry, but perhaps develop some regions, perhaps do many things, and thus it just got lost into doing this. So how you define your goals, is this important? Perhaps, for example, in comparing to Paulo's case in the mining, perhaps the companies were more focused in what they were trying to do, right? And perhaps that's why they were met, one of the reasons they met with greater success. Question, who wants to address this?
Okay, so in the case of shipbuilding, that's very clear. The whole idea that we actually observed was that there was policy intentions to actually develop regions, and when you look at the amount of investments, of course, every state will try to get a piece. But if you're not smartly selective in order to actually see what are the regions that actually have the highest potential of succeeding, right? If maybe if we had concentrated in one or two main shipyards and focus attention in actually doing those first steps, perhaps we could reach faster results. And that's not what happened. So the let's say the institutional governance part was actually work was successful, but when you go to the implementation and on the MESO side, planning the industry, planning the regions, planning the how these companies will be integrated and so on, that was where it started. And related to focus, Nick, in the case of of Petrobras, there were a lot of technological challenges for actually exploring the oil offshore, but Petrobras kind of went for this shipbuilding business, which is not the core business of Petrobras, was not the core business of most of the companies that got involved in the process. They dealt with infrastructure projects, so let's say they had the non-technological capabilities or the organizational capabilities to deal with complex projects, but they lacked the technological capabilities of actually dealing with ships, So it's imbricated. These two things are connected.
I got it. Too much. Anybody else wants to respond, or we have other questions waiting as well? Okay, seeing no one, I have a question for Professor Chung. This is a question from Korea, a Korean participant. It says, I will read it to you. Regulatory innovation is costly as well as risky, especially when the target technology is state of the art. Therefore, how can economies strategically decide whether to commit to certain regulatory innovation? This is the question.
Probably the issue is related to, well, he's saying that how can the economies strategically decide, but for the certain regulatory innovation, but I think we have to put it in a different way. First of all, in the Korean case, the many technology development, when you closely look into, you don't need a regulatory innovation, just simply import the regulatory regime and just simply apply it. But when we come to a term of state of art, that we have to create our own regulatory innovations. When we come to terms of creating regulatory innovation, require huge capacities, not only technological aspect of it, but also we have to understand for the roadmap and also some of the regulatory related laws and etc. And also other technological issue and other test bed issues, so on. Many things are very much complicated. So when we come to terms of the building of regulatory innovations, as I said, as a commentator mentioned, that other complementarity, the element, has to be followed. Without having such element, we'll never achieve regulatory innovations. And also from my case of the SMART, even though the developer has their own technological competencies, but regulators didn't have any competence to develop the regulatory regime. So there are a mismatch. So other things has to be complemented, that these are the very important issue related to achieving the regulatory innovation. That's the very first thing has to solve. That's my opinion. Yeah. Okay.
Very good. Thank you. We have another question. The question comes from Natalia Pufal. Natalia is a doctoral candidate at with Paulo Zawislak in Rio Grande do Sul. She is also related with Campinas and George Washington. So She was visiting last year. She has a very important question here. And the question is directed first to Paulo and to André, specifically for Brazil, but it could go also to Professor to Jae Young, and could be addressed very much to Professor J.D. Lee, who is writing on this issue. So the question is as following. What should be considered for an effective learning by Brazilian companies? And I think could be any company, not only Brazilian. In order for them to move from implementation to design capabilities in the long-term perspective. So in other words, what should be considered for the effective learning? Give us examples of effective learning when they transition, right, from implementation to design.
May I, Nick?
Absolutely.
Thanks for the question, Natalia. Yes, based on the evidence, we can say that an emphasis on demand side is quite important, and how companies somehow organize themselves to meet potential and existing demands is quite important. And this perhaps may be one of the explanations for the difference between the successful story of the mining industry in Brazil and the less successful story of the shipbuilding industry as described by André here. The other factor would be how companies manage their learning processes. In less successful cases, we tend to see a narrow perspective on learning processes, whereas in more successful cases, the evidence suggests a wide range of learning processes which is involved, from doing based, from non-R&D based, to experimentation, up to more sophisticated science-based learning. So I guess those, or at least what the evidence is telling us, is that how companies connect with demand on the one hand, and on the other hand, how they manage a wide variety of learning processes. I think, Nick, this is valid for any latecomer company.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anybody else?
If I may add, I think one part of the answer is what Anwar talked about on the innovation paradox, right? Related to managerial skills and capabilities that many of the middle-income countries find themselves. Firms do not know how to manage properly their resources, and that, of course, creates an issue when they want to try something beyond that. But also, I was thinking about this morning before the presentation, when we compare the successful cases of South Korea in the past and why in Brazil that didn't seem to work beyond the breadth of what the policy tried to achieve. In previous years in the Asian countries, we had a very big investment in the social fabric, right? As Professor Jay talked about, related to minimum levels of knowledge on engineering, maths, and basic skills that actually make people, professionals that are able to absorb those technologies and actually create those technologies later on. We haven't seen the same type of investment in Brazil before trying to this big policy. So when you look like PISA indicators of education and stuff, we have 200 million people in Brazil, a little bit more than that, but we might extract sufficient people to actually that have high skills, but for such a big policy, we need much more than that.
So bottlenecks. Yes, Jayon.
from implementing to the design capabilities, looking at the Korean case, I found the some cases just struck me. First of all, from implementing to the design capabilities, there are clear cut of the local university play a role playing important. And the importance of the domestic universities, that's one part of the new phenomena for developing technologies. And second, I think the law firms began to publish their papers. So when they're moving from the implementation to design, this is the evidence from the Samsung Electronics. We have found that there is a substantial increase in the knowledge production, the publications at the design, or maybe even the frontier level stage. That's the second. And also in the Korean case, now there are close interaction between science and technologies. So interaction between the science knowledge and technology knowledge becomes much more intense, and also much more a coupling process can be found in the Korean case with respect to implementing to the design capabilities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I saw Paulo Zawislak.
Hi, hello everybody. Well, I was hearing a little bit of all you were saying, and one thing that is calling my attention, especially when we look to Brazil, is the fact that normally we are too much technology oriented in terms of what leads us to catch up. So we always focus on technology, product or process and technology. And what our research is showing us, we have Natalia is working hard on that. We have very fresh data on a 5-year cross survey showing the difference on what companies are to deal to at least have success. I'm thinking that catch up depends on upgrading, and upgrading depends on capability building. So we are trying to understand capability building, but not only technological capabilities, but especially non-technological capabilities. And what comes in my mind, hearing you all talking a little bit about, is that when we talk about not only building capabilities, but technological upgrading, I think we should start thinking in terms of a sort of organizational upgrading, because that's what we find in Brazilian companies. Someone will invest on high tech, for example, but we'll keep doing business as usual. As the as usual in Brazil is very tricky, because the day-by-day economics and managerial challenges are not as the same as when you have when you are in the technological frontier, something like that. I think we have to think about not only on terms of technology upgrading, but also in terms of organizational upgrading, and this is something that we are missing.
Excellent, thank you. I couldn't agree more. I wanted to actually invite perhaps Professor Lee, J.D. Lee, if you could give us, we have, I must say, we have only 5 minutes left for this session. So if we can be quick. Professor Lee, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, very short comments to the question you delivered to us regarding the learning mode for the transition from implementation to design capability. Learning modes are quite different between implementation and concept design capability. For the case of the implementation, learning should be based on learning by doing and based on external knowledge. But to promote design capability, we should have learning by building based on try and error. So those two modes of learning are quite different. And In that sense, the André's example, such as the shipbuilding industry, might such kind of a mission-oriented project might be a very good platform to make a good learning opportunity for both cases. For the case of implementation, when we try to have such kind of mission-oriented project, we should focus on the quality and maximizing the diffusion of external knowledge. But if we utilize the maximum effect out of the mission-oriented project for design capability, we should focus more on small betting, such as set the detailed stages of roadmap, which makes us to check the feedback informations. For the case of Korea, when the Korea tried to develop digital switching technology for the information for the ICT, the government, as one of the mission-oriented projects, set the roadmap just in just a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. They said version 1, TDX1, and then for the next 10 years, they upgraded the version TDX1, TDX2, TDX3. So in those process, by dividing the big project into small one, then Korea made kind of a virtuous cycles based on the feedback informations. So during that process, Korea could get concept design capability. That's the comment I have.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And to be closing this, of course, policy should follow or go hand in hand with the different strategies that are needed in different stages of catching up, correct? And that is the big question. I think Anwar raised it, actually. The role of the government is not the same as it is in early stages of development as in later. Policies need to be adapting all along. Can you tell us something in the next 2-3 minutes before we close about this? Who wants to comment? Anyone? Okay, Anwar, I thought you would comment on this, but clearly government needs to be as smart as the industry, right? To follow the industry along. I want to put on the table a question that I will ask in future meetings of this group. And this question is that we tend to navigate all the time towards manufacturing sectors. Today, what I like very much, of course, the mining sector, thanks God, we get a little bit outside the manufacturing. But I want to say that the big gorilla in the room is service. Our economies are service-oriented economies. Even Korea's economy is service-oriented, increasingly so these days. And the question that I will leave on the table for the future is whether what we are learning in these issues about manufacturing, the experiences that we have in manufacturing, actually apply to service sector. Or whether we have a major gap in our understanding now. I see the hand by Slavo. So,
yeah, I think on your last point, don't forget that these 3 cases which we have, they're examples of COPS, complex product systems. So in respect, the services, intangible knowledge component is everywhere around. So yeah, I take your point, but you are probably referring to services as standalone. But actually what we see now is this increasing merger, and these are good examples just of a challenging and emerging economies in a more type of COPS type of systems, where the institutional, non-technological, systemic capabilities are crucial. So yeah, I take your point, but I think that we already kind of covered with the specificity of our cases.
Thank you. Very, very well taken. Very good comment. Okay, unless, is there any closing statement, quick closing statement from anybody here?
Nick, regarding service, I agree with Slavo that, for instance, in the mining industry, but also in other kinds of industry, we see an interdependent relationship between manufacturing and service. And in the mining industry, we see the emergence of knowledge-intensive service companies, such as in Australia, South Africa, Chile, but also in Brazil, we have some emerging companies based on service, but related to the mining industry.
Very good. Okay. Thank
Can
you.
I say just one little thing, 30 seconds?
Yeah, Paulo.
Yes,
Go ahead.
well, it's not only a matter of manufacturing and service, what they call servitization. We are working over the agribusiness sector, and the agribusiness sector in Brazil is very, very much service-oriented nowadays. Of course, you have the traditional agribusiness sector, but the new emerging agribusiness sector with agri-tax and so on is completely service-oriented. As you know, we work with capabilities, and we start with manufacturing. We have gone through agribusiness, and now we are on service capabilities. We are trying to understand innovation capabilities in service. And what we are now understanding is that perhaps in 10 or 15 years, we won't be able to separate in terms of manufacturing, agribusiness, or service. I think every kind of sectors will be a sort of a converged, mixed, or something like that, because digital technologies and the way we deal with natural resources and industrial and manufacturing principles on both sides are changing completely the landscape of sectoral structures and so on. So this is, I think, something we can think about it.
Very good. Thank you, Paulo. I think this is the best closing statement for this discussion. We will have more. There will be 3 more workshops like this one in the new year, of course. Wait for the dates, but the next one, we know what they are going to be on, and the next one will be on emerging paradigms of such upgrading, with emphasis on the environment, energy, and actually inclusion, which is a huge topic internationally for science and technology, right? Inclusion. So you will see the announcements soon, I hope. This is sort of an effort that is involves 5 universities from 5 different countries. So what to work on is always a little bit challenging, right? George Washington University in the US, Campinas from Brazil, University College London in the UK, the National Research University, Higher School of Economics in Russia, and the Seoul National University, Seoul National University in Korea. So 5 universities co-organizing is a little bit of a challenge. But this will be the topic of the next. Please stay tuned and you will see the announcement.